long before the world we know began to take shape, before the fields of England were divided by hedges, roads, and quiet towns, a different landscape stretched across the island. It was a place where the sound of wind over open marshes mixed with the calls of distant birds, where rivers wound unbroken through wild woodland, and where silence settled like a long exhale. As you listen now, let yourself drift gently into that quieter world. Feel your breathing soften, your shoulders loosen, and your attention melt slowly into the story ahead. And if you find your eyes growing heavy, that is perfectly fine. This history is meant to accompany you into a peaceful night. Welcome back to Sleepy Owl. To begin the journey, imagine the shores of Britain in the fading years of Roman rule. The empire that once stretched across continents was weakening, and its grip on the island grew softer with every passing season. Soldiers returned to distant homelands, forts that once buzzed with discipline and order fell quiet, and towns that had thrived under Roman guidance began to unravel. What happens to a land when its protectors fade away? What fills the space that empire leaves behind? With the Romans drawing back, new movements stirred across the sea. People living along the cold, sweeping coasts of what is now Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands looked outward toward the island that lay just across the water. They were farmers, sailors, small communities shaped by harsh winters and restless tides. Life was not easy, and the promise of fresh land, open land, pulled at their imaginations. But what truly drives a people to uproot themselves? Was it hardship, ambition, or simply curiosity? Boats set out from those northern shores, carved from timber and guided by hands that knew the moods of the sea. Each vessel carried families, tools, livestock, and whispered hopes. Nights spent crossing the channel must have felt uncertain, rocked by waves and the unknown. Yet each wave brought them closer to the island that would slowly become home. When the early groups reached the eastern coast of Britain, they did not encounter a unified realm. Instead, they found many small communities scattered across fields and forests. Some welcomed the newcomers, hoping they would help defend against other threats. Others watched cautiously, unsure what these arrivals would bring. And still others resisted, clinging to what stability they had left after Rome's departure. In times of change, who decides which path a land will take? The newcomers, whom later generations would call the Anglo-Saxons, did not settle all at once. They explored. They tested the land. They built small clusters of homes, simple wooden halls warmed by central fires. Imagine the glow of those fires at night, the smell of timber smoke drifting upward, and the murmur of voices carrying through the dark. Early settlements were modest, but they were full of resolve. Seasons passed, and these small communities learned the patterns of the island. They watched the rivers rise and fall, learned when the fields softened for planting, and adapted to the forests that surrounded them. Their communities grew slowly, shaped by cooperation and necessity. How does a way of life take root? It begins with many tiny decisions: where to build a hut, where to graze animals, how to divide work among families. Over time, more arrivals crossed the sea. Some came from familiar shores, following stories of opportunity, while others traveled from slightly different regions with their own customs, dialects, and beliefs. As these groups mingled, they stitched together a new cultural fabric. Languages blended like threads, and traditions reworked themselves into something both old and new. If you listen closely, you might imagine the mix of voices in those early gatherings, each with its own cadence. Though they shared broad similarities, these groups did not see themselves as one people at first. The notions of Englishness or a single united identity had no firm shape yet. What existed instead were clusters of settlements, each loyal to its own leaders and following ways of life that suited its surroundings. A community near the coast lived differently from one tucked into woodland valleys or settled along fertile river plains. This patchwork of early societies created a landscape full of variety and local character. Even so, their world was not only one of survival. They carried stories with them, ancient tales from across the water, stories of wandering heroes, of beasts and spirits, of ancestors whose names lingered in memory. Around evening fires, as the day faded into quiet, these stories deepened their sense of belonging. What binds people together more firmly than shared memory? As generations settled into their new rhythms, the land continued to change. Meadows expanded, forests receded, and connections formed between once isolated settlements. Trails became familiar paths, and those paths grew into routes for trade and communication. Through these links, new friendships and rivalries emerged, shaping the early political landscape of the island. But beneath this slow growth, a subtle tension always hummed. Different groups, each with their own customs, sometimes competed for influence or territory. And the people already living on the island had not vanished. They remained present, their traditions interwoven with the newcomers in ways both peaceful and uneasy. When so many ways of life overlap, how long does it take before a new order seeks to rise? As the settlements slowly strengthened, life across the island began to show the first hints of organization that went beyond simple clusters of homes. Leaders rose not because of inherited rank, but because they possessed a steady voice, a sharp memory, or the rare ability to settle disputes with calm authority. Imagine those early gatherings beneath wooden beams, where families sought guidance for matters of land, harvest, or shared defense. People wanted reassurance that their fragile world could withstand the trials ahead, and they looked to those who proved reliable in moments of uncertainty. These emerging figures were less like rulers and more like anchors, keeping their communities steady when the shifting landscape threatened to pull them apart. These leaders helped shape the earliest communities into something more coordinated. Paths between settlements became safer, agreements between families grew clearer, and the rhythms of farming settled into patterns that felt dependable. Yet the land was still unpredictable. Storms could flatten crops, sickness could sweep through a village, or rival groups might press too closely against borders that were never truly fixed. When night settled over the fields, many surely wondered whether this new life could endure. In times like those, what thoughts drifted through their minds as they stared into the darkness? Along riverbanks and open plains, some of the larger groups began forming their own identities. They spoke similar dialects, followed familiar customs, and recognized the authority of the same respected figures. Over time, these clusters transformed into small territories, early hints of the kingdoms that would later define the age. But in these early days, they felt more like extended families than true states, bound by necessity rather than ambition. How many generations does it take for scattered households to become something greater, something with purpose and direction? Despite their growing stability, these communities remained deeply connected to the land. Their lives were measured by the turning of seasons, the movement of animals, and the uninterrupted cycles of planting and harvest. The earth itself felt like a constant companion. To them, nature was not something to conquer but something to understand, to appease, and to respect. Their beliefs echoed this connection. Spirits lingered in groves and streams, and the unseen world felt close enough to touch. Even the wind carried meaning, whispering through the branches with a voice older than memory. As groups expanded, so too did the need for protection. Wooden palisades rose around some settlements, built from straight young trees sharpened to points. Watch posts overlooked river crossings, and families kept a careful ear tuned to the sounds of the surrounding forest. Though large-scale conflict was rare at first, tension often simmered where territories met. People living in uncertain times learn quickly that caution is a form of survival. The creak of a branch at night, the rustle of leaves along a boundary path, any sound could prompt a wary glance. Still, life was not defined only by vigilance. Days were filled with farming, weaving, tool-making, storytelling, and the quiet joys of ordinary existence. Children played near longhouses, animals wandered the edges of fields, and the smell of hearth smoke drifted through the cool air. In the evenings, as firelight flickered against wooden walls, families shared meals while elders recounted tales from the old homeland. What memories did they cling to most fiercely, the ones left behind or the ones they were building with each passing day? Perhaps both held a special place in their hearts, creating a bridge between past and present. As decades passed, the distinctions between different groups became more pronounced. They crafted ornaments with distinct patterns, shaped tools in slightly different ways, and practiced rituals tied to their own ancestral traditions. These differences did not always cause conflict. Often, They added richness to the growing cultural landscape. But at times, neighboring groups found themselves drawn into disagreements over land, honor, or resources. Small disputes could blossom into larger struggles if no one intervened to settle them early. Balance was delicate, and even minor misunderstandings could echo across entire regions. Leadership grew more formal as communities expanded. Charismatic individuals became recognized chiefs, and chiefs sometimes gathered followers who trusted them in both peace and hardship. These figures often traveled between settlements, settling arguments and reinforcing alliances. Their presence brought reassurance, for people believed that a firm voice could maintain balance during fragile moments. But even the strongest leaders understood that influence was fleeting. Power in those days was as shifting as the weather, changing with fortune, loyalty, and the unpredictable needs of the people. In many regions, trade began to flourish. Boats moved along rivers, carrying goods such as pottery, cloth, grain, and carefully forged metal tools. Travelers exchanged stories as readily as supplies, carrying news across the island, news of births, alliances, disputes, and omens that stirred curiosity. Through these connections, ideas spread quietly, creating new blends of custom and practice. What thoughts passed through the minds of those early traders as they drifted along calm river currents? Perhaps they wondered how far their journeys might take them, or how the world beyond their home settlements continued to change. With time, the outlines of emerging territories grew clearer, even if boundaries remained fluid. Communities with shared ancestry or mutual protection pacts gravitated toward one another, forming the earliest foundations of recognizable political regions. These were not yet the great kingdoms that history would one day record, but they held the seeds of future power. The people living then likely had no sense that they stood at the beginning of something far larger than themselves. They were simply trying to build lives strong enough to endure the uncertainties ahead. Yet, as always, the natural world remained their constant companion. They observed the flight of birds for signs of changing seasons, watched the movement of stars to guide their timing, and listened to the hush of forests as though the trees themselves carried wisdom. In a world without maps or written laws, nature served as both teacher and guide. Those who lived close to the land understood that survival depended on respecting its rhythms and adjusting to its moods. Through cooperation, caution, and shared effort, early groups gradually created networks of trust. Their world was fragile, but it held enormous potential. The land they settled would one day give rise to stories of kings, wars, and transformations that shaped the course of an entire nation. But for now, it was simply a place of hope, a place where families looked to the horizon and wondered what new paths awaited them as the island continued its slow drift toward the future. Even as uncertainty lingered, a quiet sense of determination threaded through daily life. Each sunrise reminded them that effort and resilience could shape the land into something lasting. Shared meals strengthened the bonds holding their communities together. Journeys across rivers or forests whispered the promise of new possibilities. In these beginnings, the future waited patiently, forming itself from countless choices made by people searching for a place to belong and hope. As the generations passed, threads of identity slowly wove themselves through the growing communities. People began to speak of their homelands with familiar names, names that felt comforting when spoken aloud beside the evening fire. These names carried weight, not because they represented large kingdoms, but because they anchored families to a specific corner of the island. A valley, a river bend, a hill crowned by trees could become a symbol of belonging. In a world still forming itself, even a small patch of earth could feel like the heart of something greater. How often did people look across their fields and sense that they stood within a living story still unfolding? Customs deepened as families established traditions to mark the cycles of life. Small ceremonies accompanied the birth of a child, the harvest of crops, or the coming of colder months. The rhythm of the seasons shaped their days just as surely as any leader's decisions. When the first frost settled over the land each year, families prepared their stores of grain, repaired their homes, and gathered close for warmth. Winter, though harsh, brought moments of closeness. Picture the glow of a central hearth, the soft crackle of burning wood, and the quiet conversation shared between loved ones while snow drifted silently outside. Trade connected more distant communities, and skilled workers became increasingly valuable. Metalworkers crafted tools with careful precision, shaping iron into blades, axes, and plows. Woodworkers built boats that could glide effortlessly across rivers. Cloth weavers created garments that offered comfort and protection. These craftspeople held knowledge that could not easily be replaced, and their skills were treasured. In a time before written instruction, every technique was preserved through demonstration and memory. What stories did they tell as they worked, passing both skill and wisdom to younger hands? As people traveled for trade or exploration, they carried news across the island. Word spread of unfamiliar groups settling new regions, of alliances forming between scattered settlements, and of leaders whose influence stretched farther than most. These leaders, though not yet kings, had qualities that drew others to them: steadiness, fairness, and a knack for guiding difficult decisions. When challenges emerged, such as disputes over land or competition for resources, they stepped forward to mediate. Their voices helped maintain fragile peace during uncertain moments. The land itself played a powerful role in shaping these early societies. Some communities thrived near fertile plains where crops grew easily, while others depended on livestock raised on wide, open pastures. Settlements near the coast relied heavily on fishing and trade, sending boats across the water in search of opportunities. Forest communities gathered timber, hunted game, and made use of the rich natural resources surrounding them. Each region developed its own character, molded by the environment that sustained it. And yet, no matter how different their landscapes, people shared a universal desire for safety and stability. Even as life grew more organized, the island remained far from peaceful. Tensions simmered where territories overlapped or where older inhabitants felt threatened by expanding newcomers. Groups clashed occasionally, not out of ambition for conquest, but out of fear of losing the land they depended on. Most conflicts were small and brief, resolved before they spiraled out of control. But each disagreement left a mark, teaching communities the delicate balance required to preserve harmony. How could such a fragile world ever hope to unify? Religious beliefs offered guidance in moments of uncertainty. The early settlers honored spirits tied to the natural world, guardians of forests, rivers, and sky. Rituals were performed to gain favor or seek protection, often accompanied by offerings of food, crafted objects, or symbolic gestures. These practices brought comfort during difficult times. Imagine standing before a quiet grove at dawn, mist drifting between the trees, while the first rays of sunlight illuminate the leaves overhead. In such a moment, the boundary between the seen and unseen must have felt thin, as if the land itself listened. With time, some regions developed structured meeting places where disputes could be settled and agreements confirmed. At these gatherings, elders and leaders spoke on behalf of their people, while others listened respectfully. These councils fostered dialogue, allowing neighboring groups to manage territory, share resources, and maintain peace. They also strengthened the bonds that held communities together. People began to realize that cooperation could achieve more than isolation. What thoughts stirred within them as they recognized that unity, however fragile, brought strength? Stories continued to play a central role in shaping identity. Tales of ancestors, migrations, and legendary journeys were handed down through generations. These narratives preserved values and memories, reminding people of their origins. They spoke of distant homelands across the sea, of storms weathered during travel, and of the first settlements built upon unfamiliar shores. In the retelling, these stories gained new layers, merging old and new experiences. Around communal fires, children listened with wide eyes, imagining the distant places their ancestors once called home. By now, certain regions grew more influential than others, often due to natural advantages like fertile land, access to trade routes, or the presence of charismatic leaders. These centers attracted families seeking opportunities or safety, slowly expanding into larger territories. Though still modest by later standards, they represented the early foundations of future kingdoms. People living within these regions may have sensed subtle changes: the emergence of larger gatherings, more defined boundaries, and leaders whose authority extended beyond a single settlement. Did they wonder where this growing complexity would lead? Despite this growth, daily life remained humble and grounded in simple tasks. Families tended fields, raised animals, crafted tools, and repaired their homes. Children learned chores through repetition, gradually mastering the skills needed to sustain their community. Social bonds deepened through shared work and mutual reliance. No one survived alone. Every meal prepared, every tool forged, and every home repaired represented collaboration. This interconnectedness was the quiet engine behind their survival. As the island's social landscape evolved, outsiders sometimes arrived, travelers, traders, or wanderers seeking refuge. Their presence offered glimpses of distant worlds and new customs. Some brought unfamiliar goods or stories, sparking curiosity among the locals. Others stayed, gradually weaving themselves into the community's fabric. These newcomers influenced language, craftsmanship, and social habits, contributing to the island's increasingly diverse culture. Change arrived slowly but steadily, carried by footsteps along well-worn paths. Through all these movements, the people continued shaping the land, carving out spaces for themselves in ways both subtle and lasting. Trails widened, fields expanded, and networks of communication strengthened. The once scattered settlements began forming recognizable regions. Some areas rose in prominence, while others remained quiet and rural, defined by their closeness to nature rather than political influence. But every corner of the island contributed to the unfolding story, playing a part in the gradual emergence of a new world. And yet, beneath this surface of progress, a deeper transformation brewed, one that would reshape belief systems, political structures, and the very sense of identity that defined these people. The island stood on the edge of a transition that would leave no region untouched, setting the stage for the rise of the first great powers of the age. As the island moved steadily toward a new era, subtle changes began weaving themselves through daily life. Travelers from distant coasts carried unfamiliar ideas, and whispers of shifting beliefs drifted from settlement to settlement. People who once turned solely to the natural world for guidance now heard tales of a faith that spoke of a single guiding presence, a message carried quietly by wanderers who sought no wealth, only a chance to share their teachings. At first, these ideas seemed distant, like a soft echo carried on a faraway wind. But over time, the echo grew clearer. How does a belief, carried by only a few gentle voices, reshape an entire world? Before these new ideas took root, the people relied deeply on the traditions woven into their lives. Rituals tied them to their ancestors, to the earth beneath their feet, and to the seasons that governed their survival. But curiosity is a powerful force. When unfamiliar stories arrived, stories about compassion, sacrifice, and distant lands, some listened with quiet interest. Others hesitated, unsure how these new tales fit alongside customs that had endured for generations. Change rarely arrived in a single moment. Instead, it crept softly, step by step, accompanied by questions spoken in the privacy of the home. Leaders, too, felt the shifting winds. Some saw opportunity in embracing new beliefs, understanding that shared faith could strengthen unity across scattered settlements. Others held fast to the old ways, fearing that change might fracture the delicate balance sustaining their communities. Each region moved at its own pace, each leader guiding their people according to experience, preference, and instinct. Even so, the landscape of faith began to transform, shaping social bonds in ways no one could fully predict. As spiritual life evolved, political structures continued to grow more complex. The once loose territories had taken clearer shape, and some had developed into early kingdoms, still forming, still fragile, but undeniably influential. Leaders who ruled these regions needed more than charisma. They required strategic minds capable of navigating alliances, rivalries, and the delicate dance between cooperation and defense. What must it have felt like to stand at the head of a growing territory, aware that every decision had the potential to reshape countless lives? Amid these political developments, trade expanded further, connecting distant communities in ways unimaginable centuries earlier. Boats traveled along rivers with increasing frequency, carrying goods that represented not merely survival, but craftsmanship and creativity. Pottery bore intricate patterns, metalwork grew more elaborate, and woven fabrics displayed motifs inspired by nature and myth. Even the simplest objects reflected the hands and hearts of those who made them. Trade routes became lifelines, stitching the island together with threads of exchange and mutual benefit. Life within the settlements continued to blend the ordinary with the remarkable. Fields required constant tending, livestock needed care, homes had to be maintained against the elements. Yet woven through these routines were moments of profound beauty, sunsets washing the landscape in gentle color, laughter echoing across meadows, or families gathering to share meals after a long day. Children played near the edges of fields, their imaginations painting the world with wonder. In such moments, did people realize how deeply their lives were intertwined with the land's quiet rhythms? As regions grew stronger, rivalries intensified. Not all disputes could be resolved through dialogue. Some tensions escalated into conflict, driven by competition over territory, resources, or long-standing grievances. Small skirmishes occasionally broke out along uncertain borders. These confrontations were seldom large, yet they left profound impressions on those involved. A single clash could ripple through multiple settlements, prompting new alliances or deepening old divides. In such a fragile world, peace was precious and conflict carried weight. To protect themselves, communities developed structured forms of defense. Warriors trained with purpose, mastering weapons crafted with care and respect. Defensive walls were reinforced, and lookout points became common features along strategic paths. Yet even as preparations for danger increased, most people hoped never to see their weapons used. The desire for stability outweighed the impulse toward destruction. In the quiet hours of the night, how many warriors stared into the darkness wondering whether conflict could be avoided, or whether fate had already chosen a different path. Despite the tension, cultural life flourished. Music, poetry, and storytelling continued to illuminate evenings spent around the hearth. Verses carried the memories of ancestors, celebrated heroes, and cautioned against arrogance. Poets held a unique place in society, for they preserved the collective memory of the people. Their words shaped identity, honoring both the triumphs and tragedies that had brought communities to their present moment. Through these stories, children learned values, adults found comfort, and elders remembered the journeys of their youth. In some regions, new faith practices blended with old traditions, creating rituals that carried echoes of both worlds. A ceremony might begin with ancient gestures yet conclude with unfamiliar words spoken softly into the air. This blending marked a transition not rooted in conflict, but in adaptation. Human beings naturally reconcile new ideas with treasured traditions, weaving them together into something uniquely their own. Over time, these blends shaped cultural identity in profound ways. As the early kingdoms grew more defined, leaders sought ways to maintain stability. Some formed alliances through marriage, linking families across territories and strengthening bonds between regions. Others gathered councils of trusted advisors, drawing on wisdom from elders, warriors, and skilled workers. These councils helped guide major decisions, offering perspectives shaped by experience and insight. Leadership was not a solitary path, it was a shared responsibility, supported by the strength of the community. Trade with lands beyond the island increased as well. Sailors ventured across the sea, returning with goods that sparked curiosity, glass beads, fine blades, or even small pieces of jewelry crafted in distant workshops. These items carried stories of lands most people would never see, reminding them that the world was far larger than the boundaries of their own valleys and forests. What emotions stirred in the hearts of those who examined these foreign treasures, aware that people far across the water lived lives as rich and complex as their own. Despite growing connections, many areas remained rural and peaceful, shaped by routines that had changed little over generations. Forest paths wound between settlements, streams provided fresh water, and wildlife moved through the landscape with quiet confidence. The natural world remained a central presence in daily life, offering both beauty and challenge. People respected its power, acknowledging that survival depended on living in balance with its rhythms. Even as the world transformed around them, individuals continued searching for meaning in the midst of uncertainty. Some found comfort in spiritual practices, others in family, and still others in the knowledge that they contributed something essential to their community. The island was changing, but its people remained resilient. Their efforts, fears, hopes, and dreams all played a role in shaping the unfolding story of a land moving steadily toward a new age. And now, as these early foundations solidified, the stage was set for the emergence of true kingdoms, territories with defined identities, strong rulers, and growing influence. The age of scattered settlements was drawing to a close, making way for the rise of powers whose destinies would shape the island for centuries to come. As the island's early territories matured into recognizable realms, the balance of power shifted in quiet but significant ways. Leaders who once guided only a handful of settlements now found themselves responsible for vast swaths of land, populated by people who looked to them for stability, protection, and fairness. The world had grown larger, more interconnected, and far more intricate. What must it have felt like to watch a simple community transform into something approaching a kingdom, knowing that every decision carried the weight of countless lives? Across wide stretches of countryside, recognizable regions began to take shape. Their borders were not marked by walls or carved stones, but by shared customs, dialects, and alliances that had strengthened over generations. People living near forested hills might claim one identity, while those near winding rivers embraced another. These regional distinctions brought both pride and rivalry. The sense of belonging deepened, yet so did competition for influence. How easily can pride become tension when neighboring realms seek to assert themselves? Amid these transformations, leaders emerged who possessed both strength and diplomacy. Their influence reached beyond their immediate followers, for they commanded respect across territories linked by trade, marriage, or shared challenges. Some rulers sought peace, preferring negotiation over confrontation. Others believed that dominance was the surest path to security. When two such visions collided, the island trembled under the strain of conflicting ambitions. The ordinary people, however, continued to carve out quiet lives. Their days unfolded in familiar rhythms, fields tended at dawn, tools repaired in the afternoon light, animals herded at dusk. Communities expanded carefully, building new longhouses, storing surplus grain, and improving their defenses when needed. In the evenings, fires illuminated gatherings where families recounted news from afar. Stories of rulers, distant conflicts, or unusual omens traveled quickly, sparking both curiosity and caution. Did listeners ever wonder how much these distant events might reshape their own small corner of the world? New beliefs continued weaving themselves into daily life. Faith practices that had once seemed unfamiliar gradually took hold in many regions, gaining strength through the influence of rulers who embraced them. Simple wooden structures began to appear, places where people gathered not only to worship but to find solace in moments of uncertainty. These spaces offered a sense of unity that transcended the boundaries of clan or territory. As more communities built such places, the island's spiritual landscape shifted, creating new bonds that stretched across regions. Still, not everyone accepted the changes at the same pace. Some held firmly to ancestral traditions, seeing the new beliefs as a departure from the customs that defined their heritage. This divergence did not always cause conflict, but it underscored the complexity of a society in transition. Two neighbors might pray to different powers, yet still share meals, labor, and laughter. In this way, the island demonstrated that identity could be both diverse and harmonious, at least when circumstances allowed. Trade networks expanded further, connecting regions through winding river routes and well-traveled roads. Markets became gathering points where people exchanged goods as well as stories. Metal tools from one region might find their way into the hands of farmers in another, while delicate ornaments crafted in distant workshops could become prized possessions for families living far from the coast. The exchange of goods enriched daily life, but the exchange of ideas enriched the mind. Through these interactions, innovations spread quietly, shaping agriculture, craftsmanship, and social structures alike. With expanding influence came expanding conflict. Rival realms sometimes pushed against each other, testing boundaries and probing for advantage. Skirmishes broke out over contested land or long-standing grievances. Though not always large in scale, These confrontations carried real consequences. Warriors trained year-round, honing their skills to protect their people, while communities fortified their settlements with deeper ditches and stronger palisades. Even in times of peace, the possibility of conflict lingered like a shadow at dusk, impossible to ignore. Yet hope remained a constant companion. Families looked to the future with cautious optimism, certain that their efforts could build a more secure life for their children. Every new season brought the promise of growth, whether in crops, trade, or understanding. Communities held festivals that celebrated both survival and abundance, offering moments of joy amid the pressures of daily life. Picture vibrant gatherings where music drifted through the air, where people danced beneath the open sky, and where laughter echoed across fields lit by the glow of torches. The island's leaders recognized the importance of alliances. Through marriages, treaties, and symbolic gifts, they forged bonds that could stabilize regions or shift balances of power. Diplomacy became an essential skill, allowing rulers to navigate a landscape where trust was valuable and loyalty was never guaranteed. Advisors played critical roles, offering insights drawn from experience and from careful observation of neighboring realms. In a world filled with shifting allegiances, wisdom was a treasure as valuable as strength. Cultural life continued to flourish despite, or perhaps because of, the uncertainties of the time. Poets composed verses that honored great deeds, preserved ancestral memory, or captured the fleeting beauty of nature. Musicians crafted melodies that soothed weary hearts or inspired the brave. These artistic expressions shaped identity just as surely as politics or warfare. They reminded people of their shared humanity, offering comfort during moments of loss and celebration during moments of triumph. Rulers who embraced the new faith sometimes commissioned monuments or gathering places that became symbols of unity. These structures served not only as spiritual centers but as markers of a realm's growing influence. Through them, leaders demonstrated their commitment to guiding their people toward a more cohesive future. At the same time, remnants of older traditions remained visible across the island: stone formations, sacred groves, and ceremonial sites that whispered of an earlier age. The coexistence of old and new reflected a society navigating the delicate balance between honoring heritage and embracing change. Nature remained an ever-present force in the lives of the people. Storms could damage crops, droughts could threaten livestock, and harsh winters could test even the strongest communities. But the land also offered abundance: fertile soil, fresh water, and resources essential for survival. People developed a keen understanding of the environment, learning when to plant, when to harvest, and when to seek shelter from the elements. Their relationship with the land was both practical and deeply spiritual, shaped by gratitude as much as necessity. Through generations of effort, communities that once struggled to survive had grown into organized realms with leaders, laws, and cultural identities. Yet the journey was far from complete. Rumors began to circulate of new threats emerging beyond the island's shores, distant forces gathering strength, preparing for journeys across the sea. These whispers stirred unease, reminding people that no realm, no matter how strong, was ever beyond danger. As the island stood on the threshold of a new and challenging chapter, its people braced themselves for change. They had endured hardships, forged alliances, and shaped a world from the ground up. And now, they would face the final trials that would determine the fate of their emerging kingdoms. As whispers of distant dangers reached the shores of the island, a subtle tension curled through daily life. Traders returning from voyages spoke cautiously of fleets gathering across the sea, of powerful leaders rising in lands far removed from their own, and of ambitions that stretched beyond familiar coastlines. At first, these stories felt unreal, just fragments carried by travelers accustomed to exaggeration. But as more voices repeated the same warnings, people began to wonder whether a new and formidable chapter lay just beyond the horizon. How does a society prepare for a threat it cannot yet see? Leaders across the island listened carefully, measuring the gravity of each report. Some dismissed the rumors as little more than distant noise, believing their realms strong enough to weather whatever might come. Others sensed that the island's hard-won stability was fragile, that a new force could easily upset the delicate balance that had taken generations to build. councils gathered with growing urgency. They discussed defenses, alliances, and the possibility that the peace they cherished might soon be tested. In those quiet halls, lit by flickering torches, decisions were made not only for the present but for the generations that would follow. Among the people, everyday life continued with a blend of determination and caution. Farmers tended their fields as always, though they sometimes glanced toward the sea with uneasy curiosity. Craftsmen continued their work, forging tools and ornaments that reflected both skill and tradition. Children played near the edges of settlements, unaware of how swiftly the world around them might change. Even in uncertain times, life persisted, held together by routine and hope. Does fear weaken a community, or does it bind them more tightly together? The first signs of approaching danger were subtle: strange ships seen on distant waters, isolated raids along vulnerable coastlines, and stories of foreign warriors fierce in battle and relentless in ambition. These incursions were small at first, almost probing in their nature, as if testing the island's defenses. But they grew bolder with time, leaving burned settlements, stolen goods, and shaken survivors in their wake. Communities that had enjoyed relative peace now faced the reality of a threat unlike any they had known before. The island's rulers understood that isolation could no longer protect them. To stand against such formidable forces, they needed unity. Alliances that once formed out of convenience now became essential. Leaders met to discuss strategies, merging their strengths in hopes of resisting the growing storm. Some territories, long separated by rivalry or old grievances, found themselves setting aside differences in the face of a larger danger. Could this newfound cooperation be the key to their survival, or had divisions grown too deep over the years? Warriors prepared in earnest. They trained day after day, strengthening both body and resolve. Their weapons, once symbols of territorial defense, now became tools for survival. Along the coasts, families fortified their homes, built watchtowers, and organized patrols. At night, the glow of distant fires sometimes rose along the horizon, a silent reminder that the threat was drawing nearer. Yet even as fear spread, so did courage. Communities that once felt scattered discovered their shared purpose, standing together in the face of uncertainty. And through it all, life continued. Markets opened with cautious optimism, offering goods needed for both daily survival and defensive preparation. Poets and storytellers reminded people of their ancestors' resilience, weaving words that eased trembling hearts. Spiritual leaders offered comfort, encouraging people to trust in both their faith and their own strength. These moments of unity revealed something profound, that even in times of trial, the human spirit searches for connection, meaning, and hope. The foreign forces did not relent. Their raids grew larger, their ambitions clearer. They sought not merely treasure, but footholds, places from which to expand their influence across the island. Coastal regions bore the brunt of their assaults, prompting inland territories to respond with haste. Leaders sent aid, warriors, and supplies to vulnerable communities, understanding that the fall of one region could jeopardize them all. How often must people confront hardship before realizing that their destinies are intertwined? A turning point emerged when several realms united under a shared banner, recognizing that only through cooperation could they repel the advancing threat. These combined forces, strengthened by shared purpose, met the invaders with determination born from generations of resilience. Battles were hard-fought, shaping the memories of all who lived through them. While the cost was high, the unity forged in these struggles would echo across the island's future. Gradually, the island pushed back the waves of foreign pressure. Through persistence, strategy, and collaboration, the communities defended their homes and preserved their way of life. The cost of this victory could be felt in every settlement, stories of bravery mingled with sorrow, triumph intertwined with loss. Yet the people endured, just as they had across centuries of change. The island remained theirs, shaped by their sacrifices and strengthened by their resilience. In the aftermath, leaders sought to reinforce the fragile unity that had emerged. Some regions combined under shared authority, creating stronger, more cohesive kingdoms. These new political entities laid the foundation for the island's future identity, carving paths toward organization and stability. People adapted quickly, finding comfort in the idea that their struggles had meaning, that their hardships had helped shape something enduring. A new sense of belonging spread across valleys, hills, and coasts. Life slowly shifted back into familiar rhythms. Fields were replanted, damaged homes rebuilt, and wounded spirits tended through shared stories and renewed community bonds. Trade resumed with cautious optimism, bringing new goods and ideas that helped reinvigorate daily life. Children born during this era of renewal grew up hearing tales of courage, unity, and survival, stories that inspired a stronger sense of identity rooted deeply in the land. Through all these transformations, the people discovered a truth that would echo for generations. Strength isn't born from isolation, but from the quiet courage of standing together. Hope survives not because the world is gentle, but because the human heart refuses to surrender its light. And now, as the long sweep of this journey settles into stillness, you can let the story rest gently in your mind. The world of the past, with all its struggles and triumphs, has carried you through a landscape shaped by time, resilience, and quiet determination. Feel the calm settle around you as you breathe deeply, letting the lessons of these ancient lives bring comfort and peace. Thank you for wandering through this gentle history with Sleepy Owl. When you're ready for more soothing journeys through time, you'll always find a warm light waiting here.